In a quiet Memphis neighborhood, a simple morning turns into a storm of injustice when a 70-year-old woman is accused of wrongdoing for merely holding her phone. A young officer, driven by pride and the illusion of control, misreads the moment, and his choice sparks outrage across the community. But fate steps in through her daughter, a Delta Force officer whose discipline and courage shift the entire course of the story. And just wait until you see how this gripping confrontation ends when truth, grace, and justice finally stand side by side. The morning in East Memphis began with a soft haze of golden light stretching lazily across rooftops and the smell of freshly watered grass drifting in the air. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of silence that spoke of safety, of lives that moved gently and predictably. On Brookline Avenue, every lawn was trimmed, every porch neat, every morning routine mirrored the ones before it. Mary Johnson believed in those routines. At 70, her days followed a calm rhythm. Tea at sunrise, a short walk along the flower beds, a few pictures of the morning sky on her phone to send her daughter later. She was a widow of a man who had spent his life serving the country, and she carried herself with that quiet dignity that long years of perseverance bring. The photos she took each morning weren't for show. They were her way of holding on to beauty, of reminding herself that even in a chaotic world, peace still existed in small places. This morning, she wore her favorite white dress light, almost shimmering in the sun, and a wide straw hat with a faded ribbon. Her little dog, Daisy, trotted beside her, sniffing along the edge of the sidewalk as she raised her phone to catch a picture of the sunrise peeking through the clouds. The light touched her eyes, and for a moment she forgot everything else. The bills, the noise of the world, the loneliness that sometimes sat quietly in her living room. Only the sound of birds and the faint breeze existed, but that peace broke the moment she heard the slow rumble of a police car turning onto her street. It was unfamiliar here. A patrol cruiser rarely passed through this side of the neighborhood unless something serious had happened. The car moved slowly, its polished exterior reflecting the trees. Mary paid it no mind at first. Perhaps the officers were just doing routine rounds. Still, the unease crept in when the car stopped directly in front of her house. The door opened, and a young officer stepped out. He couldn't have been older than 30. Clean cut, tall, his posture spoke of fresh confidence, maybe too fresh. The nameplate glinted in the sunlight. Rivers. His eyes scanned the scene quickly, settling on the phone in Mary's hands. "Good morning, ma'am," he said, his voice controlled but lacking warmth. "Can I ask what you're doing out here with that camera?" Mary turned, slightly startled. "Oh, I'm just taking pictures of the morning sky. It's a habit of mine," she said, smiling politely. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" The officer didn't answer. His gaze remained on her phone as if the simple act of recording the horizon carried some kind of hidden threat. "Could you tell me why you're recording near these homes?" He pressed again. Her smile faded. "This is my home," she replied quietly. "I live here. I wasn't recording anyone, just the sky." A pause, the kind of pause that grows until it feels heavier than words. The air seemed thicker now, almost humming. Officer Rivers shifted slightly, clearing his throat as if trying to reassert control of the situation. Maybe it was tension, maybe simple uncertainty, but something in his eyes showed conflict, a shadow of doubt. "Well, I'd appreciate it if you stepped over toward the curb," he finally said. Mary blinked. "The curb? Why? I'm not doing anything wrong." "Please, ma'am. Just a precaution," he said, his tone firmer this time. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Her fingers trembled slightly. She had lived long enough to know that these moments could change quickly, even when no one meant for them to. "Officer," she said softly, "is something wrong? You're making me nervous." Across the street, blinds shifted. A few neighbors peeked out from their porches, whispering uncertainly. One of them, Mr. Howard, a retired teacher who lived 2 houses down, raised his phone, worried. He knew Mary. Everyone knew Mary. She was no threat to anyone. The breeze picked up again, carrying the dry rustle of leaves as Officer Rivers took a small step forward. His expression remained professional, but there was unease in his gestures, a tension that didn't belong in such a quiet morning. "Ma'am, just cooperate. It'll be fine," he said quickly. We've had reports recently about recording in the area. I just need to check." "I'm 70 years old," Mary interrupted, her voice shaking but steady. "Do I look like a threat to you, officer? I've lived here for 30 years. My daughter serves this country. I've done nothing wrong." For a fleeting moment something flickered across his face. Regret, confusion, perhaps embarrassment. He hesitated, his hand lowering slightly. It might have ended there. But then the radio on his shoulder crackled with static. A distorted voice calling a code he didn't fully catch. The jolt of sound broke his composure, reigniting his unease. In his mind, it became about control, about doing things by procedure, even if the procedure didn't quite fit this situation. "Please, just step back," he repeated, louder this time. The tone now drew more neighbors to the window. Mary's heart raced. She didn't want to cause a scene. She placed her phone carefully on the stone step beside her. Daisy whimpered softly, tugging at her leash. The stillness of the neighborhood turned into an invisible storm. Anxiety rippled through the air. Within seconds, what had begun as a calm morning felt charged with fear and misunderstanding. Todd Rivers stood tense, unsure of what to do next. His training told him to stay authoritative. His conscience urged him to step back. And standing opposite him, frail but unflinching, Mary Johnson waited, hands shaking but eyes calm. Two strangers caught in a moment that neither of them truly understood yet. The world around them seemed to hold its breath. By the time Jessica Johnson's phone began buzzing across the metal table at the Delta Force training facility, she had already run 6 miles, climbed 2 walls, and pushed her team through a tactical drill. Sweat glistened on her skin beneath the Carolina sun as she wiped her face with a towel and glanced down. The caller ID froze her mid-motion. "Mr. Howard, next-door neighbor." "Ma'am," his voice trembled through the speaker. "It's Mary. Something happened. The police were here." Jessica's heart seemed to stall. Her mother and the police, the two things that never belonged in the same sentence. For a moment the world around her disappeared. The sound of drills, shouts, pounding boots, faded into background static. She didn't even finish the call. She grabbed her jacket, keys, and walked toward her jeep with the same calm urgency she carried into deployment zones. To her soldiers, that meant catastrophe. The drive from Fort Bragg to Memphis blurred into a tunnel of lines and memories. The rhythmic hum of the highway did little to drown out the rising worry in her chest. She remembered her mother's smile over Sunday calls, gentle, teasing, so full of calm after years of raising Jessica alone. She pictured the garden, the white fence, the dog that always barked when anyone came near. The thought of that peace being disturbed filled her with unease, a feeling sharp and cold as steel. When Jessica reached the hospital, dusk was settling. The sky's edge glowed orange, an almost surreal beauty against the flashing lights still faintly visible in the neighborhood down the hill. Inside, the air smelled like disinfectant, and something she couldn't name. Fear, maybe. Her boots echoed as she walked through the corridor until she saw the familiar face of Mr. Howard waiting. "She's awake," he said quietly. "She asked for you." Jessica exhaled slowly before stepping inside the room. There was her mother, frail yet composed, her arm wrapped, her face pale but strong. For a second, the soldier and Jessica vanished, replaced only by a daughter crossing the space between them. "Mom," she whispered. Mary smiled weakly, eyes soft yet tired. "You came fast." The silence that followed was heavy, but not empty. It carried everything words couldn't hold. Worry, anger, confusion, the deep ache of disbelief. "What happened?" Jessica asked finally. Mary looked at her hands as if the answer might be there. "I was taking pictures, and he stopped me, said I looked suspicious. I told him it was just the sky," she said slowly. "But he didn't listen. He kept shouting. I wasn't loud." "You know me, Jess. I wasn't loud." Jessica's jaw tightened. And then Mary's gaze shifted to the window, the sunlight fading into night. Then everything happened too fast. Jessica didn't push further. She already knew what too fast meant. Her training taught her to recognize measured restraint, calm before retaliation. But this wasn't a battlefield, and her mother was no soldier. For a long moment Jessica stood still. Her breathing steadied, but her eyes darkened with something deep. the controlled fire of someone who understood discipline as much as justice. "Did the department send anyone?" she asked. They called it a misunderstanding. The words fell like cold steel between them. Jessica closed her eyes, drawing in a long breath through her nose. She could almost hear her commanding officer's voice in her head, reminding her to stay in control. But this wasn't a mission. This was personal. When she left the room, the quiet turned sharper. Every step down the corridor felt deliberate. She wasn't rushing. Delta Force didn't rush. They moved with precision. And Jessica intended to do exactly that. Out in the parking lot, her reflection in the Jeep window caught her off guard. She saw her mother's eyes in her own, calm, weary, but steady. Jessica leaned against the door, letting the scene sink in. Her phone buzzed again. Messages, articles, a short clip already spreading through social media. It showed a part of what happened. The officer's raised voice, Mary stepping back, Daisy barking, and neighbors shouting in confusion. It wasn't the full story, but enough to make Jessica's stomach twist. Memphis had seen many stories like this. Too many. But this time, it wasn't just another stranger's name on a headline. It was her mother, the woman who had taught her patience, courage, and compassion. Jessica straightened, eyes hardening in resolve. That night, as the city lights flickered in the distance, she made a silent promise. Not one of revenge, but of reckoning. She would uncover the truth, every detail, every command, every decision that led to that moment on the quiet street. And when justice came, it would come with precision, the kind only a soldier could deliver. Jessica spent the next few days in Memphis like a woman moving through smoke. Everything felt close, yet unreachable, heavy with meaning. She had always been trained to notice patterns, habits, inconsistencies, but this time it wasn't enemy tactics she analyzed. It was her own city. Her mother's case wasn't an isolated mistake. The more Jessica learned, the clearer it became that this was part of something far larger. At a local cafe near the courthouse, she met with a civil rights attorney named Daniel Brooks, a calm man in his 40s with tired eyes that had seen too many similar cases. He spoke quietly, but directly. "What happened to your mother isn't new," he said. "Memphis has a pattern of unnecessary use of force, especially in neighborhoods like this. The Department of Justice recently opened an investigation, and the findings were serious. The police here use force too often and without proper oversight. They stop people for minor issues, sometimes for no reason at all." Jessica listened in silence, expression calm, though her fingers tightened on her cup. "So this isn't about one officer," she said flatly. He shook his head. "It's the system. They've been flooding streets with patrols, claiming it's for public safety, but it gives too much freedom to individual officers. Mistakes happen, and sometimes those mistakes change lives." Jessica looked through the cafe window at the quiet street beyond. The same city that raised her was now a map of contradictions, hospitality and tension, warmth and fear. She suddenly remembered her childhood here, her mother working late, teaching her that integrity was worth more than ease. "That woman you see in there," Jessica said, her voice low but steady, "taught me everything about honesty. She wouldn't raise her voice at a stranger. And yet she's sitting in a hospital bed because someone decided she looked suspicious holding a phone." Daniel nodded. "Then you have to make sure people see what happened. Collect evidence, witness statements, and don't let them bury this under another headline." That night Jessica returned to the house she grew up in. It still felt the same. The creak of the porch, the faint smell of jasmine from the garden. Inside, the half-finished cup of tea her mother left that morning still sat on the table. Time seemed frozen in that small kitchen. She opened her laptop and began organizing everything she had: video footage, neighbor testimonies, timelines of events, background on the officer's record. Her military discipline turned the emotional into methodical precision, but beneath the structure a steady current of emotion stirred, not anger but purpose. When she finally turned on the news, the headline confirmed what Daniel had said. Federal reports showed Memphis law enforcement had been accused of excessive force and discriminatory practices. It was all there, written plainly. Investigations, reforms, promises. But for all the words, One truth remained unchanged. Her mother's bruises were real, and the explanations came too late. Jessica leaned back, staring at the screen's glow. She thought of every code of honor she had ever sworn to uphold, and how respect was supposed to be reciprocal, earned by integrity, not demanded by authority. For the first time since arriving home, she felt something unexpected. A faint glimmer of hope. If the system could be confronted openly, maybe others wouldn't have to live through the same ordeal. Down the hall, Mary's quiet breathing echoed faintly from her room. Jessica walked there softly, standing in the doorway for a long time, just watching. Her mother slept peacefully now, her face gentle, unaware that the entire city was about to learn her story. Jessica didn't smile, but something in her eyes steadied. Injustice had opened a wound, but she intended to turn it into a symbol, not of pain, but of strength. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to walk it. Step by step, truth would come to light, and when it did, it would shine far brighter than the morning sun over Memphis. The courthouse was crowded that morning, every bench filled, every hallway lined with quiet anticipation. Reporters set up cameras outside, their equipment catching the shimmer of the Memphis sun. People from across the city had gathered not because they knew Mary Johnson personally, but because they recognized something in her story, something that echoed years of frustration and a longing for accountability. Jessica stood at the front beside her attorney, Daniel Brooks. She wore her uniform jacket over a plain black blouse, not for recognition, but for presence. The insignia on her shoulder carried its own quiet message: discipline, honor, and a reminder that leadership means standing tall, even when the ground feels unsteady. Inside, the courtroom air was still. The presiding judge, an older woman with silver hair and a calm yet commanding tone, called the session to order. Across the aisle, Officer Todd Rivers sat stiffly with his counsel. His face was expressionless, but his hands shifted restlessly under the table. For the first time, the weight of his decision had brought him into a world where authority was no shield. Daniel began with a voice as smooth as water over stone, not harsh, not theatrical, but steady. "This is not a story about violence, Your Honor," he said. "This is a story about restraint, about what happens when a citizen does everything right and the world still turns against her." He played the recording from a neighbor's phone. The video was short, but powerful. Mary standing with her small dog, holding her phone low. A wordless exchange escalating into tension that needed no sound to be understood. The courtroom watched in silence. Even without raised voices, the imbalance of power was clear. Mary sat quietly near the front, her hands folded in her lap. Her face was calm, her dignity unbroken. To her, the moment wasn't about punishment. It was about truth finding its place. She had spent her life teaching her daughter to choose courage over anger, and today, seeing Jessica beside her, she felt that lesson return full circle. When Jessica spoke, she didn't raise her voice. She simply described arriving at the hospital, seeing her mother shaken but resolute, and watching the news clip that had since traveled across the nation. "My mother raised me to serve with integrity," she said. She believed in respect, both giving and receiving. That belief cost her her peace of mind. "I'm not here out of vengeance. I'm here to make sure it doesn't happen to someone else's mother." Her words carried through the courtroom with the quiet gravity that no uniform or title could create, only conviction. The defense tried to argue procedure, suggesting the officer acted out of precaution, not intent. But the evidence, the witness accounts, and the department's recent federal reports painted a different reality. The facts were clear: patterns of excessive force, poor oversight, and a lack of accountability that had stretched on for years. This was not an isolated event. As hours passed, reporters noted the rare unity among those watching. It wasn't about division, but about recognition, that justice wasn't opposition. Justice was balance restored. When the verdict was finally delivered, the words were simple yet overwhelming. Officer Rivers was found guilty of misconduct and unlawful use of authority. A collective sigh swept through the room, not of vengeance but release. Mary closed her eyes for a long moment, whispering something no one heard. Perhaps a prayer, perhaps a thank you. Jessica placed a steady hand on her shoulder. For the first time in weeks, the air around them felt lighter. Outside the courthouse, the crowd applauded quietly as the two women emerged together. Reporters shouted questions, but Jessica spoke only once, her words calm, almost reflective. Justice isn't about anger. It's about truth. My mother taught me that. As they walked down the courthouse steps, the Memphis sun spilled across the marble walkway, warm and unclouded. The noise around them faded into something gentler. Birds, footfalls, and, somewhere nearby, the faint hum of a city learning to breathe just a little easier. That evening, in their small home, Mary made tea again, the same routine she had followed every morning before it all began. Jessica sat opposite her, the air filled with the scent of jasmine from the garden. Nothing extraordinary happened. No grand speeches, no lingering bitterness. Only peace, earned the hard way. Across the city, people watched the story replay on the news. For some, it was just another headline. For others, it was proof that even quiet voices, when carried with courage, could reshape an entire conversation. And for Jessica Johnson, it was something more. A reminder that sometimes the truest battles aren't fought with strength, but with grace.